Mr. Derek Corrigan. You've been a mayor of Burnaby for many years now, and we had a nice talk last year. The news of TransLink's board of directors going back to the hands of the provincial government, was that a good news?
No, it was bad news. It was extremely disappointing. I really can't believe that the provincial government would effectively deny an agreement that they made with the cities, that they would overturn it by legislation. It's probably the most abusive conduct in regard to municipalities that I've seen in my 21-year career. So it was a terribly depressing situation for us to be put in. It was one that really was a result of Kevin Falcon being bitter about the board voting against the RAB line twice, seeking personal revenge. He promised to punish the board for voting against it, and then accomplishing that revenge using provincial power, using the ability even to close debate on the issue in the House. So it was, I think, one of the low points of this provincial government and one of the low points for municipalities.
And right now, that new board has taken over, and the mayors are rubber stamping whatever they say.
I don't think the board actually has taken over. You know, peculiarly enough, is that the CEO is making announcements all through the transition, even before the board met. So I think it pretty well determines how this board is going to run. They're going to be a rubber stamp agency for the bureaucrats in TransLink. When have you ever seen, in the history of corporations, private boards, when have you ever seen a board stand up for the shareholders or stand up for the citizens? Is that I can't think of a single example. When you talk about an organization like Enron, where was the board of directors? Globe.com, where was the World.com, where was the board of directors? Conrad Black, where were the board of directors? So these private boards are almost inevitably a rubber stamp for the CEO and the bureaucracy, who simply do what the CEO says and collect their paycheck every month.
The CEO of
TransLink, who will do what Kevin Falcon wants. So in reality, what we have is Kevin Falcon with a tame board of Liberal flunkies doing exactly what the Liberal government wants them to do, and asking us as mayors to rubber stamp the taxes that are paid to TransLink in order to support that.
So I sense there is some struggle between the bureaucrats and the politicians here.
I think the bureaucrats are very happy to be out of the control of local politicians. You know, we have accountability to the public, and that means that we make the bureaucracy accountable to us. And so it's not a comfortable position to be put in when there's questions being asked all the time, where there's pressures being put on by mayors and councillors who believe they're representing the best interests of the citizens. You know, it's a lot better to do things behind closed doors quietly without any scrutiny, and that's what's going to be happening over the next while. It's particularly true given that in 2010 the results of the RAB line will be coming in. I mean, we will now be paying for the RAB line. The $1 billion that the private sector has been carrying will now be paid by the taxpayer. That'll mean huge increases in TransLink costs. I know that Kevin Falcon wants to bury that. He wants to hide it. He wants someone in there that will cover him as a result of those massive increases, and I expect that's part of the purpose in getting rid of our board.
You spoke about $250 million deficit. Is it still on, or is it happening, or something has changed?
Oh no, we're still looking at a massive deficit at that point, and you know, the difficulty is the private sector board will be prepared to cover it up, make cuts, privatize parts of it. I suspect we're going to see a lot more of the Ponzi game going on, where they propose selling more of the system to the private sector. That he uses arguments like we can put in turnstiles if we sell it to the private sector, or we can get the Northeast Sector line built. So I think what you're going to see is a board that's responding to the agenda of the provincial government, and it's one in which they are going to practice avoidance as much as possible of getting the real information out to the public.
You say to get the Northwest line built as a private partnership?
Oh, I suspect that's on the agenda. It will be immediately on the agenda to look for a private corporation to take it over, much as they've done with the
similar to the Canada line.
With the Canada line, and it was a matter of policy that they were doing it privately on the Canada line. They refused to let any the SkyTrain even become a partner with any of the private sector on that. They specifically would not allow SkyTrain to run the system. So I suspect now, if I were going to prophesy, I think they'll look for a way to sell the whole system, the Millennium Line, the Expo Line, and likely have a private sector line built in the Northeast sector.
You spoke also of $100 billion or $100 million approximately as profits and interest of the private partners' share. If they go ahead in the same fashion with the North-West line, would that be an additional maybe $100 million that would soak money from the rest of the system to pay the private partners?
Exactly. The whole idea is for the private sector to make exorbitant amounts of money on the back of the taxpayers. And in many ways, it's to take that money, that debt, and spread it over a long period of time, in most cases 35 years, which means the choices that we're making now, we will saddle our children and grandchildren with, so that they're going to keep on paying, and they're going to pay exorbitant amounts. So part of the idea of private companies doing this work is for us to get what we want now and to pass the costs on to future generations. That's what's so shameful about the process.
Mm-hmm. Is it written down that if these private partnerships don't have enough revenues from ridership, the rest of the system would have to contribute to make up the shortfall?
Exactly.
Was that part of the contract?
Exactly. Is that one of the things that the private sector does when they build these kind of agreements is to take absolutely no risk whatsoever. So the idea that's promulgated by people like Kevin Falcon that the private sector is taking risk is absolutely ridiculous. Look at the cost of the project. The Canada Line was prophesied to be $1.6 billion. It's now $2.2 billion. And all of that money is coming from the public, from the taxpayer. There's nobody in the private sector who's losing money on this deal.
You mean provincial input or federal input? Or
I'm talking about the private sector is in fact going to be billing TransLink and local taxpayers for that. The provincial government and the federal government froze their contribution. They're making no more contributions to this project. All of the cost increases, all of the excesses are going to be on the back of the taxpayer. All they did was delay the payment of those monies until 2010 when the line starts operating. At that point, we've guaranteed that there's going to be a ridership of 100,000 people on the RAB line, on the Canada Line, which is equivalent to the ridership of Expo at this point after 20 years.
Who guaranteed? TransLink guaranteed that to the private partners?
Granted to the private partners, and they've guaranteed it to the private partners that we in fact will pay if there is a shortfall in ridership. We're the ones who have control over the ridership. So what you're going to see in Vancouver, interestingly enough, is Vancouver, who has had probably the best grid system of buses anywhere in North America, are going to lose that grid system. The north-south buses will be taken out, and those buses will be going east-west in order to feed the monster that is the Canada Line, in order to promote the level of ridership that the provincial government needs to be able to justify the line. So many of the people who've been riding buses on Victoria, or Fraser, Granville, will now find that they can't get downtown via those buses, that they have to go over to the RAB line, to the Canada Line, to be able to get on, purely for the purpose of increasing the ridership.
And if that ridership is not met, what happens?
We subsidize it. We pay additional money to the private corporation. For God's sake, they're not going to take any risk. I've told you, as you probably aren't getting this, but the private sector takes no risk. The idea of all of this is for the private sector to have guaranteed income. That's how they're able to market it to pension funds, to investors around the world, is that they're going to get a higher rate of interest than we would pay under Municipal Finance Authority as borrowing as a government. They're going to get a higher rate of interest on this project borrowed through the private sector. So we're paying through the nose in every sense of the word.
And that is the sad news. Is there any solution to that problem? Is there anything that citizens that understand what you're explaining, is there anything that citizens could do to divorce themselves from this deal? Or are we hooked for 40 years?
Well, the citizens have been quiet throughout this process. The citizens have voted in the Liberal government. They continue to poll supporting the Liberal government. So it's apparent, that there's a large amount of citizens in the province who really don't care about the privatization of our resources, don't care about the privatization of our infrastructure, and are willing to take benefits now and put the cost onto future generations. People are going to have to think about this issue. They're going to have to determine what they want in their province. You know, my grandparents and great-grandparents, my parents built this province, and part of what they did was they built the infrastructure and public ownership to be able to support future generations. This generation is giving it away. This generation, through its own negligence, is ignoring the reality of a government that has only the interests of the corporation in mind. They don't care about your average citizen in British Columbia. They care about the people who pull their strings, the corporate agenda, whether it's the Vancouver Board of Trade, or it's the BC Business Council, or it's the multinational corporations that are chomping around for an opportunity to get at our assets. That's what they're buying into. It's shameful. And it's one that citizens have to stand up against, or we're going to lose everything that our grandparents and great-grandparents built.
How are we going to stand up? What do you mean by stand up? Those a few of citizens that do care about it and do understand the problem, how are we going to stand up? What can we do?
Well, I think that this provincial government is very much populist. It's one that reacts to public opinion. One of the things we can do is to begin to campaign in our society for people to begin to understand what's happening, is that we can work the email, work the ability we have to interconnect with each other. One of the wonderful things that we have in our society now is the ability to circumvent the mainstream media using our own means of communication. You know, it's obvious that the Vancouver Sun and the province are too corporate interested. I mean, their Fraser Institute Board of Directors, their membership on the Vancouver Board of Trade, those are all indicators that they're really, you know, carrying the spear for this government. You'll look at the editorials, you'll look at the columns that are in the paper. It's clear that this government is supported by both the Vancouver Sun and the province. And so what the media does is it promotes this government. It promotes the things this government is doing as being good public policy. We need to find ways around that. We need to communicate to people about what's really happening. And that means we have to circumvent the mainstream media in order to do that.
So going back to the former question was, is it possible for, if a significant number of citizens oppose this RAB line, Canada line deal, is it possible to get out of it?
No.
So legally it's impossible. We're hooked.
You are, as they say, done like dinner. You're toast. The reality is that this mistake has been made. Do we continue to make the same mistake? Is the public going to recognize that the Canada line is a huge mistake? It's a massive white elephant that's going to burden the transit system for 35 years. And are we going to do that again? Are we going to give up the rest of the system to the private sector? Are we going to lose control of all of that infrastructure, all of that public investment? You know, that's the question that we have to answer. I mean, at this point, we've watched the provincial government take municipal politicians out of the transit system and hand it over to their private board of Liberal insiders. You know, and really there's been no objection. The public has been relatively silent on that issue. The bully boys in Victoria get their way, and they know why Kevin Falcon was doing it, to exact personal revenge on the board and to ensure that he had a board of directors that was going to do what Kevin Falcon wanted. Public has to step up. The question is, again, do we look at a different government? Do we look at having the NDP in as opposed to the Liberals? If they see that threat on the horizon, if they see that the public is beginning to understand this privatization agenda, whether it's in our water or in our hospitals or in our roads, if they begin to recognize this privatization agenda is contrary to the public interest, this government will start to back off.
Mm. And family law, you can divorce your wife, and with politicians, you can next election not vote for them. But you're saying with this contract, we can't. There's no possible way to get out of it. You cannot sell in business. If business is not profitable, you sell it maybe at a loss, but you sell it. You get rid of it. But you're saying that Canada Line, there's absolutely nothing we can do.
35 years of commitment to the Canada Line and to the contract with the private sector. and there is no way for us to get out of it, is we are going to just keep paying. And the reality is that the private sector has built into it inflationary increases that demand, for instance, that we must raise our transit fares on a regular basis to meet inflation. So even if we make a public policy decision that we want to hold transit fares down, is that we're committed. We're committed to this private corporation that we will raise fares by at least the amount of inflation each and every year for 35 years. So, you know, many of the things that happen as a result of privatization are that we handcuff our ability to be able to make public policy in the future, to change public policy, to look at more progressive ways of dealing with things. So in the greening of British Columbia is that there's going to be a limitation, and that limitation will be the privatization of our infrastructure.
So that depresses me very much because I see no hope of ending it. There's no way of getting out of it because if the system is already built into for profits, if we want to divorce that from that project, they probably want to get paid for the lost profits of the next 35 years.
That's right.
So it would be so costly that we might as well just carry on paying on installments.
Well, you know, and obviously a government could come in and try to do what the Liberal government has done. For instance, when the Liberal government didn't like the contract with health employees, they simply wrote legislation that got rid of the contract. They broke the contract by making legislation. So the Health Employees Union ended up with their contract being torn up in shreds. The deal that was made with the municipalities for us to take on transit and put taxes into transit, the government tore up that agreement and decided through legislation that they would implement their own system and put in their own board of directors. The difference with the multinational corporations is this is the whole purpose of the international trade agreements, to protect those multinational corporations from governments tearing up their contracts. So, in fact, if a government came in and said, this is a bad deal, it was a bad deal that was made by a previous government, we want to change the deal in order to make it more fair to the public, is that we don't have the power to do it because we'll violate the international trade agreements.
And they would sue the government for
That's right.
breaking the contract.
The government of Canada, they would sue the provincial government who has agreed on it, so the municipalities would effectively be powerless to be able to deal with it in any event, and so is the provincial government powerless to do it. What's really difficult, though, is they're going to keep doing this, is that there's been one mistake made, and they're going to continue to do it over and over and over again. This government believes that they can put everything in British Columbia in the hands of their private sector partners, who will then donate large amounts of money to continue to elect this government.
If
they find it to be the perfect symmetry.
Right. If the provincial government has been diminishing the contribution to capital cost, you told me the last time that for the SkyTrain they paid 100% of the capital cost, but for this RAB line is about 17%. If they are helping less than before, would it be possible for a municipal government to create a separate transit system?
No, municipal governments are very limited in our ability to act outside the authority of the provincial government. Is that we are what are called creatures of statute. We don't have any constitutional authority ourselves, so we're not protected by the Constitution. That's why the provincial government can bully us, push us around, do what it wants. And even though we're the government that's closest to the people, the government that's most responsive to people, we're the government with the least amount of authority and the least protection from interference by other orders of government. So it is a situation in which they hold all of the cards. And if you want municipalities to be unfettered, to have the opportunity to do what's necessary, you have to have a provincial government that respects municipalities. And it's clear this government does not respect municipalities. And it doesn't matter whether it's in the Lower Mainland or anywhere else in British Columbia, is this government has shown over and over again that they're prepared to overrule municipalities in each and every instance.